the inner cities. So he talked about how in first grade, the majority of students in inner cities are excited to attend school, but by fourth grade no longer have an interest in school. And at this point, it's because he thinks that inner city kids believe that education or lack thereof has little or no impact on their career choices. And he feels that affirmative action, while it's done some good, has really kind of divided African Americans. And so you have your advantaged African Americans and then your disadvantaged. And so the advantaged have really been able to take, well, advantage of some of the opportunities through affirmative action and things like that. He did note that the that inequality is growing at a more rapid rate in the African American community than in the white community. And he really started off his interview by talking about how after Brown versus Board of Education, the thought was that inequality and discrimination would be eradicated within a few decades, and clearly that hasn't happened. He also talked about, though, that the advantaged minorities did actually end up making more money than their Caucasian or white counterparts, and so they're actually in really high demand. So he talked about opening up the opportunity structure so that people believe that there's something to look forward to. So really starting at changing the mindset of disadvantaged minorities and really breaking that cycle. Another individual who is an advocate of low-income children is Jonathan Kozol. And in a presentation that he gave in May of this year, the big takeaways from his speech were, first of all, the access to early education and the starting point for school inequality. So he talked about that although we have all these resources and people have access to these resources, people aren't utilizing them, and so the populations that really need to be in early education are not there. And so he talked about low-income families and attending things like Head Starts, anything like that. And he mentioned that 30% of Massachusetts, approximately 225,000 preschool-aged children, 3 to 5, are not enrolled in any formal education program. So we're looking at a third of children that are not in early education, and that's really where the disadvantage starts. The second point that he made was the unequal access to early education and its lasting effects. He noticed that individuals that did not attend early childhood or early education were set on a different path and performed differently as opposed to those who did. The third point that he made in this speech was that the focus on testing kind of pushes schools towards takeover, and so it actually ends up turning more into a business than anything. He quoted the Massachusetts Education Commissioner who ordered 7 schools deemed underperforming to hire an outside partner to turn around student performance. So that's really where we're starting to look at other businesses outside of the school to help with student improvement, and that's actually something I had not heard of prior to doing my research. And Kozol really referred to third grade in Massachusetts as the beginning of the testing mania. So where things really kind of become locked down and everything is focused on that test and passing the test. The fourth and final point he made in this speech was that corporate interests now have a larger role in education policy decisions. And so he's noticing a trend, and calling it his ultimate concern, actually, is the increasingly is the increase of CEOs who are invited to participate in policymaking for public schools, and especially schools with Black and Latino students. And so he talked about the aims of school education as no longer cultural, intellectual, or community oriented. Instead, it's simply to prepare minds for markets. So I think that that's a really interesting point, and as I'm reading this, and as I was reading this, I I kind of agree with him. I think that students are under pressure to decide what they want to do before they even get to college, and oftentimes that leads students to declaring a major, taking classes, and then ending up switching classes or switching majors, and some of the classes don't apply. So I think that these two really kind of their point is that we really need to start in the early childhood, and we really need to push early intervention and early exposure, because some of these kids are not getting the exposure they need to get them ready for school. So another article that I read talked about factors that related to post-secondary attendance and college completion, and Wee and Reynolds talked about socioeconomic status, level of parent support and education, gender, self-esteem, and locus of control as some of these factors. And I think that kind of changing that mindset and breaking the cycle is really where we need to aim this. And we need to ensure an even distribution of tax funds. Kozol really pointed out, also in another article I read, pointed out that even the facilities between schools are unequal. And really, if we can't meet, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we can't meet the basic ones, how are we expecting these kids to learn? We're not creating those environments that encourage learning, and I think that that's where we really need to step up. And I do think that both experts are correct about one thing. The education system needs to accommodate all student needs and ensure that students have experiences and opportunities to aid them in future career choices. I just really think that with results-driven accountability and things like that, that this particular topic has kind of fallen to the side. And so I think that people felt that affirmative action and things like that kind of fix the problem, but in reality it's just a band-aid and not a permanent solution. And we need to start looking at those permanent solutions for kind of closing the gap between minorities, and I think that early intervention is really the key, and one that we need to continue to push and continue to support.